Hi, this is Martin Drummond with Progressive News. It's Wednesday, July 3rd, 2019, and just wanted to uh, add something on to the bit that I was doing about, Russian, Syrian propaganda.
Even obvious why Israel thinks it's in its own interest to do this.
Why do you think there's so many refugees leaving the region?
Maybe
Could
because
it be because of things like this?
maybe it's because it's not a very safe place to live. And where does this all go back to? The Arab Spring. Let's remember this all started when the West thought it could get nice, friendly governments all across the Middle East. That went.
Yeah, that's the biggest load of bullshit I've ever heard. I mean, the Arab Spring, you notice that I have American Spring. That's a group that I have on Facebook. You can see a black man lighting himself on fire. He would later die in Washington, D.C., in front of the White House or the National Monument somewhere anyway. So, the Arab Spring, I mean, are you going to say that we tried to overthrow the government of Egypt? I mean, that was the center of it, right? Tahrir Square. We have governments friendly to the United States all over the Middle East. It was nothing to do with, I mean, it was the people rising up against American governments for the most part. And Syria wasn't really a part of that. Syria was the people rising. I mean, it was the same thing in terms of the people rising up. But I suppose that all of these countries, the people are under a certain amount of pressure. But a lot of the other countries like Egypt, they're not under the kind of pressure that the Syrians were under, right? They were under a lot more. They were fighting for their way of life. Egyptians were fighting because their government is a wholly owned subsidiary of the neocons, neoconservative Americans, the Bushes, the Rumsfeld, Cheney, neocons. If you don't know what neocons are, neoconservatives, go look them up. And believe me, Newt Gingrich and people like that, they were just the icing on the cake. The neocons are really representative of the ultra-rich, the Bushes, the Harrimans, Wall Street, whatever. Which is why progressives are so progressive. Because they reject Wall Street. Wall Street was the way I've heard it described to me, and I believe it because it makes perfect sense, is that the Democratic Party needed funding. Well, we didn't really need funding. They wanted funding because they didn't feel like they could compete in a world where the Republicans were given millions and trillions or whatever dollars, billions of dollars, who knows how much really when it comes down to it. So they looked for, and they had lost money from the trade unions or something like that. I'm just going off the top of my head what I remember. And so they decided Wall Street. Well, of course, when you do that, then you work for Wall Street, not for the American people anymore. That was 1992. That's when the Democratic Party was taken over, and it was taken away from people like me. So we've got our own American Spring. So we have something we can relate to in that respect. But here they're talking about the Arab Spring. And he just lied his fucking ass off. So watch it, man. I mean, RT is a great place to find out the truth about America, right? You can go there and they'll talk about wealth inequality and how the cops get away with murder or planting evidence on Americans and all the kind of stuff that you'll never see in the American news. So, you know, to be, if you'd like to be like me in terms of my expertise in foreign policy, domestic policy, government, sociology, psychology, all these things that are all tied together to your understanding of podcast good and evil is what it comes down to, then you've got to be able to go and look at the worst of the worst. You got to listen to the worst of the worst people, the worst of the worst places. You got to go on the internet and look at and watch. Like I watch this, I watch everything I've got time for. And you've got to be smart enough to be able to pull the truth out, right? And leave the bullshit behind. So like I'm watching this and it was okay up to this point. But then to suggest that Israel's attacks recently, that it's the first time I've ever heard of a kid being killed in an Israeli attack or an American attack. Well, no. Lots of kids were killed in Mosul and in Raqqa. So I take that back on American attacks. But to suggest, and isn't that convenient? Oh, we'll just lay all the maybe million civilians who are dead at the hands of the beast Bashar and the Russian Air Force. We'll just lay all of them at the footstep of Israel. And you know I'm no fan of Israel, but I'm not going to tolerate that from a journalistic point of view. And I'm not going to tolerate them saying that the Arab Spring was caused by America going in and trying to get governments in favor of them, when most of the Arab Spring uprisings were against American-backed governments. This is Martin Drummond with Progressive News. Thanks for watching.